Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be very quick with this intro. We are going to continue from the last video where we talk about the Imperial Navy, and today we're going to discuss the Navis Imperialis' structure. I don't need to tell you to like and subscribe. If you want to go for it, but otherwise, your viewership is more than enough for me. Alright, let's get into this. Typically, the Imperium is very top-heavy in how it's structured, or at least that's how it's supposed to be on paper. However, the simple fact of the matter is that it's too big with too inefficient a form of communication to operate that way. And so, although Terra makes most of the decisions, you'll find that local initiative is still heavily emphasized. Even before the return of the Lord Regent, it was often heroic last stands, offensives, and actions led by individual sectors and fleets that kept things stable for a time. Well, stable-ish. You can't really apply stable to the Imperium. That's just not going to happen no matter who runs it these days, or really ever, for that matter. Even so, the Imperial Navy understands this to a degree and has divided itself accordingly into multiple operational zones known as the Segmentae Majoris. Every starship, fleet, group, or whatever you name it, is posted to one of these 5 segmentum, or segmentae. They are known as Segmentum Solar, Obscurus, Tempestus, Ultima, and Pacificus, mirroring the actual map of the Imperium. Any Navis Imperialis asset posted to a particular segmentum will be organized into a grand battle fleet, which is itself divided into many smaller fleets. Think Battle Fleet Obscurus. All 5 segmentae will be assigned a headquarters which organizes the overall stratagems for the segmentum it's posted in. This is known as a segmentum fortress. Each segmentum fortress is overseen by a master of the segmentum, who serves as a high-ranking official of the Adeptus Administratum. They only report to the master of the Administratum or the Lord Regent should he take an interest in the sector. As for each segmentum, I mentioned earlier that the overall battle fleet was divided into smaller groups. Each group oversees something called a sector. A sector is a region of space, typically a perfect cube on an Imperial map, which will contain, give or take, 8 million cubic light years of space. From there, you divide the sectors into subsectors. Think of these as collections of star systems no more than 20 light years in radius, give or take. These subsectors typically consist of a handful of star systems, think 2, 4, 6, 8, or more. Sometimes the radius is 10 or 30 light years. It really depends on the area and ease of travel, though honestly I really wouldn't stick to these numbers terribly much considering this is Warhammer 40k and the lore changes all the time on a dime. And quite frankly, the lore has accounted for this. Subsectors aren't really volumes of space, they're more like specifically highlighted collections of star systems, so you could have plenty of other systems in the same sector that are not considered part of the sector. These are known as intersectors, but can also be referred to as forbidden zones, empty space when it's not empty, wild space, frontier space, wilderness zones. Intersectors can contain nebulae, inaccessible areas, unexplored regions, zones demarcated as forbidden, as earlier mentioned, or sometimes they're controlled by Xenos. Now, getting back to the battle fleets, not to be confusing, the name of each fleet corresponds with the sector it's posted to. For those of you who have played the Gothic Armada games, you'll be familiar with the name Battlefleet Gothic. Battlefleet Gothic primarily operates in the Gothic sector, but it can operate beyond in times of crisis. It forms a portion of the larger Battlefleet Obscurus. And I mention Obscurus for a reason. For the longest time, Segmentum Obscurus represented the Imperium's most dangerous segmentum. This has necessitated the creation of an impressive set of battle fleets. Battle fleets Corona, Agrippina, Cadia, and Scarus, colloquially known as the Bastion fleets, were originally assigned to oversee sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror. They are some of the most expensive and well-equipped formations in the entirety of the Navis Imperialis. Due to their proximity and now their new roles, These fleets are almost constantly engaged in battle, be it the Black Crusades, Orc hordes, or Tyranid encroachment. They're always fighting someone, and these Bastion fleets will be grouped together during times of crisis. So pretty much always these days. Moving back to the bigger picture, every Segmentum's Navis Imperialis detachment falls under the command of a Lord High Admiral, of which there are 5. Of that 5, the Lord High Admiral of Segmentum Solar is considered a first among equals, going so far as to occasionally sit on the Senatorum Imperialis as a High Lord. Because of this, there is technically a rank above Lord High Admiral, the Lord High Admiral of the Navy, or Lord Militant Commander, or Lord Commander. This is a post that can only be held by a Lord High Admiral sitting on the Senatorum Imperialis. Below the Lord High Admirals are the Lord Admirals. They're also known as Sector Commanders. As an example, the Lord Admiral of the Cadian Sector commands all naval operations and assets in the Cadian Sector. Following that, you have the Solar Admirals. Solar Admirals are typically regarded as potential sector commanders who are waiting for an assignment to, well, a sector. Because it's quite rare to be assigned to a sector, you are likely going to see a Solar Admiral dispatched to a war zone in command of a reinforcing fleet, or they're kept busy with some other task. Moving on, we have the Admirals. An Admiral is allocated a portion of a sector's fleet, while the Lord Admiral focuses on the overall sector. Admirals focus on a handful of systems and regions of wilderness space as well. Vice Admirals will often command a vanguard of a given flotilla or fleet or battle group, whatever you want to name it. Aside from assisting their overseeing admiral, they're basically leading the charge in any given operation. Rear Admirals are often flag officers aspiring to rise up to the position of Vice Admiral and beyond. These days, it's typically more of an administrative role, but it's somewhat regarded as a rite of passage for flag officers. Now, that was an Admiral's soup. Honestly, I'm so tired of saying Admiral that I'm going to stop saying it starting now, and if I have to say it again in this video, I will lose my shit. Below the flag officers of the upper echelons, you have the Commodore or Group Commander. Commodores will command squadrons of ships, which generally patrol specific routes or regions assigned to their responsibility. This is a somewhat fluid rank, however, as an example, on occasions where multiple capital ships have to join together in a significant local engagement, the most senior captain will be promoted until the set engagement ends. Next up, we have the Lord Captain, rarely referred to as the Flag Captain. This is really just an honorific rank and isn't really anything important for this video. Think of it as a rank applying to someone commanding a vessel on detached duty. If you've played the game Rogue Trader, you'll know exactly what I mean. You're referred to as Lord Captain for the entirety of the game. Moving on, we have the Captain. Captains typically command a larger vessel alongside a squadron at large. On paper, these individuals are supposed to be exceptional, holding full command of many tens of thousands of souls. However, due to the nepotism, corruption, political backstabbing, murder, budgetary theft, extortion, and other crimes you often see committed by the Imperial nobility, let's just say that more than a significant portion of these captains are not qualified for the job. The same can be said for a lot of the officers in the Imperium's upper echelons as well. I'm not seeing a barrel in the back of my head. Okay, I think I'm good. Beneath the captain, you have the commander. Commanders are often in charge of individual vessels, typically escorting vessels, but there are cases where a commander could be placed in charge of a fully fledged escort squadron. You can even find them as wing commanders of attack craft or even the heads of orbital stations. Lieutenants are junior commissioned officers usually placed in direct command of smaller system defense ships or monitors, but more often than not, you will actually find lieutenants acting as second-in-command aboard escort-class ships, as part of a larger bridge crew on something like a Grand Cruiser, or acting as a flight leader in an attack squadron. Lieutenants typically do have actual potential and the opportunity for further advancement in the Imperial Navy's chain of command. If you survive as a lieutenant, you typically have a promising career ahead of you, provided you don't piss off anyone that can have you assassinated in your sleep. So basically, don't look in the general direction of the nobility, don't breathe in the general direction of the nobility, don't talk back to the general direction of the nobility. Yes, the general direction, not the nobility. Even so much as talking to the nobility will get you killed. Don't disagree with the nobility, just know what it is that you have to do. Just say yes. Just say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, or whatever they happen to be. Just avoid the nobility when you can help it, if I'm being honest with you. A midshipman is the most junior officer an officer can get. They're really just students with a rank. Well, on paper, they're afforded an officer's respect. They still have to go through it in training, and many of their duties are more hands-on. The reason they're called midshipmen is because they typically have quarters somewhere in a warship's midsection, away from the command bridge, where they can, well, ensure that they won't annoy anyone that would have them killed for no reason. This is going to be a consistent theme going forwards, just an FYI. Following that, we have the warrant officers or petty officers. Think of them as non-commissioned officers like sergeants or corporals in the Imperial Guard. They're responsible for upholding orders from higher authorities, and they ensure they're carried out by the rank and file. The reason they're called warrant officers is because they aren't officially commissioned. Their rank is obtained through a warrant from an administrative office as a result of good service. Warrant officers, as a result of this service, are given a huge amount of trust. If you have a good set of warrant officers under your belt, your ship can still function even in the most dire of circumstances. Furthermore, warrant officers are very familiar with their crew and their ship, often being from the ship they are serving on already. In fact, some of them are even void-born. Remember, many elements of Imperial crews are born in space on the ships where they will serve and live for the rest of their lives. But warrant officers can also emerge from civilized worlds after, well, enlisting in the Navy as part of a tithe, or if they just happen to demonstrate exceptional potential. This is done on paper to act as a recruitment incentive for new generations of officers. To get into a brief little thing of theory crafting and personal interpretation here, I like to think of it as going to officer candidate school, but you're actually serving in the Navy instead of just going to OCS. It's very difficult, one of the most horrific things you will ever do in your life, and you will regret your decision every step of the way. But if you stick through it and power on despite the pain, exhaustion, and homesickness, loneliness, and other mental burdens, you will prove that you have the potential to be a warrant officer. This is also accompanied by things like basic training and schooling and going to, well, war academies and things like that. It's a whole process. The few that make it through the selection process can stick it out and receive warrants. To be clear, the Imperium doesn't consider this an officer's commission. You're still joining the Navy first, and through this unofficial practice, you're elevated. With that in mind, these are the warrant officers. The ship's master is the senior-most warrant officer, and they are the most experienced voidsman or voidswoman on a given starship. They could be responsible for astronavigation, keeping charge of the log, or something else like watching over the hangar deck, supply management, you name it. They basically ensure the ship runs. Gun captains responsible for commanding gun crews on Imperial warships are, well, expert on all of the duties of any of their subordinates, and they will perform these duties, well, themselves sometimes, if needed. One only achieves this very difficult post with decades of work. The sergeant-at-arms is often placed in charge of an armsman squad. These clusters of armsmen can vary in size depending on the seniority of the officer. The greatest responsibility of a sergeant-at-arms is often considered the keys to the weapons locker of their deck. They are also more often than not the person that will shoot your ass for stepping on the toes of the wrong person, because if they don't, you will still be shot by someone else, and then they will be shot for insubordination by the squads at the behest of a very pissed off noble, and the squads can't exactly refuse that order because then, well, everyone just gets lined up in a firing line and gunned down by another squad. Next up, you have the bosun or boatswain. They are basically disciplinarians. They'll watch the common enlisted ratings and indentured workers and slaves and servers like a hawk, determining their duties and ensuring that said duties are carried out efficiently, and this means that they are responsible for enforcing discipline at times, and will handle the task personally. This makes them very unpopular, and they're often quite close to the sergeant-at-arms that you will find patrolling a deck. If the sergeant-at-arms isn't the one doming your ass, this guy is. Then, of course, you have the ratings. Simple enlisted voidsmen, voidswomen, or armsmen aboard a warship performing regular run-of-the-mill tasks, transporting shells, missiles, repairing cables, routing cables, clearing debris in ancient abandoned sectors, or just, well, being in charge of security. Most ratings are actually volunteers, and unlike most Imperials, they get paid. Yes, they actually get paid real money. It's a miracle. They actually have some standard semblance of pay. It's a beautiful thing. You love to see it. But if there are not enough volunteers, you can always press gang some hapless planet's population into a fleet of ships where they will live out the rest of their days as indentured workers. Indentured workers are exactly what it sounds like. They're slaves. They are considered lesser than even the enlisted personnel and perform hard, unskilled labor. Their duties can consist of hauling guns into position, carrying supplies, heavy equipment, manually loading giant macro cannon shells, tearing each other apart for an extra bit of food, or murdering a noble that strayed too far into the ship's lower decks, or kidnapping someone from another deck because they need someone to fill in a role because the person they were working with just died. Next up, you have specialist ranks. Specialist ranks typically involve running important segments of a ship or representing important groups. An engineer prime, as an example, also known as the Tech Priest Majoris, will communicate the needs of the local mechanicus detachment to the bridge crew. These ranks also include astropaths, ship surgeons, fleet commissars, ship confessors, and navigators. And with that in mind, that will conclude today's lesson. In our next video on the Imperial Navy, we will discuss some of the ships and their weapons. This was a very primitive overview of the Imperial Navy's structure and organization, and I strongly recommend you look more into it if it interests you. That in mind, I will see you in the cosmos, friends. Can't wait for the next Navis Imperialis video.